All right. Welcome to what I think is Lecture 8. The days are not making any sense whatsoever. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every day seems to be the same, right? Um, but today, we'll simply look at the Rocking Horse Winter. And some of you may have enjoyed the handsomest drowned man in the world, and some of you may not, may have not. So I just thought I'd give you an alternative for a short story. So let me just save you some time right now. If you're thinking about writing on the handsomest drowned man in the world, you probably don't need to watch this lecture, right? Because basically all I'm doing is giving you more possibilities for essay topics. So that the idea today will be I'm going to be all over the place just giving you a whole lot of different possibilities in terms of angles of how to get into the story and everything else. All right. So it's not like you're looking for something in particular here. And I promise I'm going to shave by the time I get to lecture 9. Okay. But anyway, I just thought I'd try something different. So, um, so anyway, today then, as I said, we'll talk a bit about D.H. Lawrence. Not too much. I've sent you the notes. As I said, I didn't do that with the first two stories, but I thought for the final two stories, I thought you should have everything you need, right? So, D.H. Lawrence. His name is actually David Herbert Lawrence, and his dates are 1885 to 1930. Okay? Now, um, again, I could go into so much in terms of biography. He was actually a poet. He was known for his poetry before he became a novelist. But it really is his novels that we remember him for. Um, and then don't know what else I want to say about that. He was his novels. If you read his novels, actually, if you read the short story, there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the short story. I think you would agree with that, right? There's a weird relationship going on between the son Paul and the mother Hester, right? Um, there's kind of like an undertone of sexuality going on there. And I know that sounds weird, but I'll get into that because it'll be a possible essay topic if you want to go there. All right. Anyway, so born in England, he had to travel a lot because of a variety of things. As I said, his works surrounded the themes surrounded sexuality, what have you, and so he was always in trouble with censors, okay, censorship and all that. And so yeah, he traveled around quite a bit. You've got it all there in your notes. But after a long bout with tuberculosis, he died in 1930 in France at the age of 44. Okay, so what I've done is I've included uh, a couple of his major novels, okay? And take a look at the titles, okay? I'm not going to do them all, but Sons and Lovers, right? Women in Love, Lady Chatterley's Lover. Okay, so you kind of see a theme going on there, right? So you get the idea, okay? And I mean we're talking 1928, 29. So yeah, he got into a lot of trouble and had to move around a lot. How about we just leave it at that? Okay. So, like I said, we're not looking for anything in particular today in today's lecture. We're just looking for, as I said, if you didn't really like if the handsomest drowned man in the world didn't really speak to you for an essay, fine, fine. Then maybe this one will. Okay, that's really the point of the lecture today. All right. So, tiny bit of background. And again, you've got it in your notes. And so like I said, the lecture today will probably go about 35, 40 minutes, only because you've got all the notes. I'm just going to touch on ideas and give you insight and maybe, comment on the story itself at certain points. All right. So he was very sickly as a child. Okay. And that sounds a bit obvious. But if you think about it, think about it. His dates are 1885. Okay. He born in 1885. So that means he's still living in the 19th century as a child. So at that time, the notion of capitalism, okay, I'm going to use that term in a very broad sense, all right? But the notion of capitalism is kind of a new thing, right? As we know it at that time. So he was sickly, okay? I'm going to connect the two things. Well, that meant he would have spent a lot of time at home. Well, if he spends a lot of time at home, he would have been surrounded, for the most part, by women. Why? because in the early stages of capitalism, it was men who went out and worked to earn wages, right, to earn a living, and women stayed at home, right? So that means he would have been raised by, and he was raised by aunts, his mother, etc. And so basically, I think the one thing we want to be aware of, only because it might give you a bit of insight into the story, is that his mother, and this is straight biography now, his mother despised, okay, I'll say the word again, despised his coal mining father. All right? So, that relationship, right? The fact that the mother hated the fact that her husband was a coal miner, which meant a laborer, which meant not great wages, right, and a very difficult life. Lawrence came to really hate capitalism early on. So obviously, when you look at the story, there will be a connection there, right? The whole idea about having to accumulate wealth, right? There must be more money. There must be more money. So that you can see the connection there right away. All right. Now, um, the division then between the public and the private, right, is also at least early on in the story is also kind of apparent. Okay, until of course the mother gets a job, which we'll talk about later on. All right, and then maybe the last thing. Yeah, maybe the last thing. Um, if you haven't, I haven't really talked about a whole lot of outside sources like film and stuff like that, only because I thought I should just give you what you need. But if you're ever interested in the whole idea of basically class consciousness, there was a documentary series, I should say, excuse me, called 7 Up. It's called the 7 Up series. If you ever want to see a fascinating documentary series, check out the 7 Up series. And it's not an easy thing to sit through because it's quite lengthy. The director takes a group of children at the age of 7 and discusses or asks them, what would you like to be in life? What are your goals, your objectives, or whatever? Okay, set in England. And then he goes back and visits them, the same individuals, at 14, and then at 21, and then at 28, and the most recent is 56 up. Okay, so it's called the 7 Up series. The most recent is 56 up. And a fascinating study as to how if you were born into a certain class, okay, in British society, chances are you'll remain in that class. The same is true in Canada, by the way. And there's a lot of mythology that goes along with that. If you happen to be second or third year at Carleton, Porter Hall, okay, if you've ever had a class in Porter Hall, it's named after a man named John Porter, who actually wrote a book called The Vertical Mosaic. And he actually does an analysis of of class mobility and shows how Canada is very similar, very rigid in relation in similarity in terms of class mobility, almost identical to British society. There's a kind of weird myth in Canada that we think we're far more mobile when it comes to class movement. It's simply not the case. Anyway, I just thought if you're interested in that, it's a fascinating documentary. Okay, so let's move into the story now. All right, and we have the Rocking Horse winner. So, like I said, this lecture will be a bit frenetic. It's going to be all over the place. I'm just going to give you ideas, right? Like it's not like I'm trying to give you something to say, this is what you have to figure out. No, I just want to give you more possibilities, just in case, like I said, that the handsomest drum man in the world didn't really work for you. Okay? All right. So let's start at the very beginning of the story. It's a really interesting opening to the story. And again, as usual, I'll probably take a break halfway through. Okay? Take a look at the language. We're on 408. There was a woman who was beautiful. Like, that's an odd way to open a story. Okay, there must be a reason why Lawrence is choosing those words. There was a woman who was beautiful, okay, who started with all the advantages. In other words, right, Basically, she comes from an affluent background, yet she had no luck. And of course, the theme of luck will be huge throughout the story. She married for love, and the love turned to dust. So does that sound familiar? Well, that's almost biographical, right? From Lawrence's own life, talking about his own mother and father. So in your essays, if you choose to write on this story, chances are you're better off not to even go there, right? You don't want to do biography. Remember, I keep talking about that. We're going to have a whole lot of other things that we're going to talk about. All right? But the next thing, she had bonny children. Okay? She had bonny children, yet she felt they had been thrust upon her and she could not love them. Okay? So, if you're not familiar with the term bonny, it just means that she has children with great dispositions, right? Like they're easily outgoing, happy, what have you. But for some reason, she can't love them. Okay, boom, right away. Let's think back now to about, 4 or 5 weeks ago? There's something missing. There's something missing, okay? Let's just read one more thing, okay? Only she herself knew that at the center of her heart was a hard little place that could not feel love. No, not for anybody. All right, she's missing something. Does this sound familiar? Lacan. Remember, right? Again, if you're stuck for a second term, a second topic for your essay, Lacan. There's something missing here, right? She can't move between the imaginary order and the symbolic order. She seems stuck, set, right? And so, if we remember back to what we talked about with Lacan, right? This whole notion of desire, right? How basically there's something psychologically holding her back from enjoying her life, enjoying, right? Or I should say, entering into the symbolic order, right? Something at the center, right? Okay? She could not feel love. So, let's connect it all right now. She is lacking. Now, if you haven't read Lacan, you don't know what I'm talking about. But if you have read Lacan, immediately, boom, there's an essay topic. She is lacking something. In order to fulfill that lack, okay, she feels she needs to desire, okay, or she needs to acquire, I should say. Okay, that's one way of reading Lacan. This whole notion that we acquire in order to fill that psychological lack, right? And that's exactly what happens in this story, is it not? So, we're told, yeah, at the center, right, she could not love. She is lacking. So I'm trying to give you the language now that you need for your second paper, right? I hope, or for at least like for your second outline or what have you. But there it is. There it is. There's the beginnings of an essay right there. Okay? All right. So in other words, she has great children. She is beautiful, okay? Quote unquote, whatever the hell that means. In other words, there's something inside of her, psychological, right? That she simply cannot get over. Okay? And so, as I said, that's what Lacan would call lack. All right. Now, we can then connect that to something else that's going on. Okay? At the bottom of 408, right? On the second column now, if you've read the story, you know the whole idea about there must be more money. I've referred to that in other lectures, analyzing literature and everything else. But notice something. At the bottom of 408, okay? Well, in the second column, near halfway down, right, there was always the grinding sense of the shortage of money, though the style was always kept up. That's kind of important too. These people are not poor. This family is not poor, right? Okay? But for some reason, there's never enough. And I'm going to get into about 5 or 6 different things when it comes to all of that as well. So make that a point, all right? They're not poor, but yet it seems as though there's never enough. All right. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, right? There must be more money. There must be more money. 3/4 of the way down in the second column, right? That whispering that's going on. And so, the thing I want to concentrate on just for now because it's in your notes. And so, the house came to be haunted by the unspoken phrase, there must be more money. Okay, 408, 409. Boom, there it is. Okay? And so, this notion of the haunted, right, of a haunted house, very interesting stuff. Stuff we don't really think about, right? Where does this stuff come from? Well, in fact, right, if you take a look at the notion of the haunted, haunted actually goes back to the idea that I quickly introduced. I didn't elaborate, right, but now I will. It goes back to the notion of aletheia. Remember what I mentioned that very briefly when we were looking at the handsomest drowned man in the world, right? Remember that? And so the house came to be haunted. Aletheia, the notion of truth or disclosure. Think about that just for a second. Whenever you go into a haunted house, right? Obviously, it's going to be dark. Like I know that sounds incredibly obvious, but in fact, there's other interesting things going on when it comes to the notion of haunted. The notion of darkness, right? Hidden, right? Then all of a sudden something comes at you in a haunted house, revealed, right? And that's where you where you get scared or what have you. Well, in fact, it's all tied up in this whole notion of truth. It, I could go an hour and a half on this whole notion of truth and everything else, but there it is, right? The notion of disclosure. And so it can be, we can, basically we can see the word in many other ways, right? Unclosedness, right? There is no such word, but unconcealedness, right? But the idea of revealing. Remember what I talked about in lecture 7, right? I think it was 7B, I think, right? And so this notion then of what is the truth. That's something that's going on in this story as well, because throughout the story, there's a lot of things that are hidden. Okay, and I'm saying that in quotation marks, hidden. What I mean though is a lot of things that are secret. The notion of secret, okay, the word secret is it happens throughout this story. So the notion of being a secret, right, meaning not to disclose, and then revealing to disclose. So think about that because of course we can then look at something else that's really interesting as well. Okay, I'm going to make a connection in just a second. All right, and so the notion of there must be more money, there must be more money. I mean, it's everywhere, right? But 408, 409, that's where you can get your quotes and everything else. And so that's one of the secrets of the house. Okay, and again, you've got that in your notes. And so it's interesting that we're also told on page 409, yeah, about what, halfway down, okay, it came whispering from the springs of the still swaying rocking horse. And we'll come back to the rocking horse a little later on, okay? And then, but that secret whisper all over the house, there must be more money. Now notice, yet nobody ever said it aloud. So I'm on 409 on the first column, 3/4 of the way down. Yet nobody ever said it aloud. So once again, that whispering is also a secret, right? You get it? So the notion of secrecy, right? Hidden, things being hidden, okay? That's what I meant by the haunted house and all of that, okay? All of these things are working at the very beginning of the story. All right. So before we get into then the next major theme, let's just talk about one thing in particular. Sigmund Freud, you've got your notes in front of you, so I don't need to go through, everything about him. Dates are 1856 to 1935. But Freud, okay, he talked a lot about this whole notion of secrecy, of haunted, of disclosure, all of these ideas, all right? And in one work in particular, which I have for you on, I can't remember if it's on Aries or if it's on See You Learn, but it's there for you anyway. He had an essay, he wrote an essay, Das Unheimlich, all right? But it translates as the uncanny, right? 1919. And he talks about this weird, I'm going to go off the notes now because you have them, all right? He talks about this weird relationship between the word Heimlich and unheimlich, meaning non. And as he goes back and looks at the etymology, okay, the history of a word, he sees that Heimlich and unheimlich mean the same thing. Okay, so let me do that again. That would be the equivalent of, in English, the word canny, meaning the exact same thing as uncanny, not canny. So, okay, how can that be? Oh, it be. Basically, okay, as he tells us, right, the notion of Heimlich and unheimlich, or canny, uncanny, has to do with the notion that certain things that are familiar can also be foreboding. And so, if you don't really get what I'm saying here, the perfect example would be the notion of the house. House symbolism is incredibly important when it comes to literature, film, so many other aspects of art. The house. The house is that thing that we are most familiar with. The house that you literally that you grew up in. But there are secrets in the house, okay? Especially as you are growing up as a child. There are secrets. Do you see the themes that are happening now in the story? The notion of secrecy, okay? The whispering, haunted, and then the house. And so this notion of things being hidden, things not talked about, okay? All of these things are happening within the story. And so that's why I included that quote from Freud. Because you see, he tells us at the end of the major quote there, okay, the notion of Heimlich is not unambiguous, okay, but belongs to two sets of ideas. Okay? On the one hand, it means what is familiar and agreeable. Think of the house now for a moment, your own house growing up, right? What is familiar and agreeable? And on the other, and it's my bolding there, what is concealed and kept out of sight. Right? If you see what I'm doing there, right? The house is your friends, for the most part, probably thought your house was perfect, everything, but you know the difference. You know that certain things were concealed, okay, kept out of sight, right? So it's a fascinating concept, and many writers, Franz Kafka, almost all of his writing deals with that whole idea. And so I thought it was interesting. I thought I would look deeper into that just to see if there was a connection there, and there was. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, and I think this is really important because remember, I'm just throwing ideas at you in this lecture, okay? Just giving you ideas for an essay. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, okay, a similar ambiguity, okay, attaches itself to the word canny. That's why das Unheimlich is translated into the English as the uncanny. Canny, okay, may mean not only cozy, if you actually look it up, okay, but also endowed with magical, okay, with occult or magical powers. Why am I bothering to even bring that up? Well, think about it. In the story, okay, Paul rides his horse and he gets insight into all of the winners, okay, of the horse races. Where does that come from? Well, you could actually make an argument that in fact somehow he is possessed. The word that we are given, occult or magical powers. So literally, you could write an argument that he is possessed, perhaps by the devil. Okay? So it's one possibility. So that's the first major essay idea that I wanted to throw at you. Okay? The whole notion of haunted, the uncanny, and then possessed. Right? The occult, etc. Now we can get into a different one. And that would have something to do with capitalism and the confusion of capitalism or capital and love. So here's another different essay topic now. All right. So the question of money and luck obviously becomes very important. And it is interesting, okay, that Paul comes to associate the notion of luck with love, right? He confuses the two. He's a child, right? He is basically searching for his mother's love, right? His mother's adoration, okay? Recognition, okay? What have you? Admiration. So he's trying to figure these things out, and I'll go back to the notes just for a second, but I mean, we don't have to spend too much time on it. It's very straightforward. I'm on the second column now in 409. Oh, said the boy, then what is luck, mother? Okay? It is what causes you to have money. If you're lucky, you have money. That's why it's better to be born lucky than rich. Okay? That's not true at all, by the way, and Lawrence would not have agreed with that, but he's writing that for a very specific purpose. If you're rich, you may lose your money, but if you're lucky, you will always get more money. Okay? Again, not true at all, right? Oh, but here's the key now. Oh, and is father lucky? Okay, the boy watched her with unsure eyes, right? Why? Okay. Oh, sorry. So he asks, is father lucky? She responds, very unlucky, I should say. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but there is a definite essay topic in that, right? And I'm sure some of you know exactly where I'm going with this. In the story, what happens is Paul is searching for his mother's love. Okay, we are told early on that she is incapable of love. So he has to figure out, okay, is there a way that I can gain that love, right? That doesn't seem to be coming to me. All right. Well, the father is rarely mentioned in this story at all, correct? Like you would have seen that. Okay. Well, if I can actually become a father figure, if I can somehow replace the father, you know where I'm going with this, right? Then somehow I can gain my mother's love. And so, obviously, Paul wishes to become basically the breadwinner of the family. You got to remember, at this time, the domestic sphere, okay, the public sphere, two different areas, right? And so domestic means like the home as opposed to going out and working. So Paul has to figure out a way to make money to support his mother. In other words, psychologically, again, I'm just trying to show you a possible essay topic. Psychologically, Paul wishes to replace the father. Okay? And this is one of the oldest stories. I've referred to it in 7b. It goes back to something called the Oedipus complex. Okay? Sometimes, as I said, referred to as the Oedipus complex. All right? And so, yeah, so there's another essay topic. Separate from what we were talking about before, with the whole idea of the house and haunted and everything else. Well, you could talk about the idea that, yeah, Paul wishes to replace the father psychologically. And so, how is he going to do that? Well, at this time, the idea would be to become the breadwinner of the family, right? To make money. And so, and again, I'm not going to read the whole thing out to you, but in fact, Lawrence himself wrote a couple of books on the whole notion of the Oedipus complex. So it's not a stretch to think that somehow that's what's going on in this story. Not a stretch at all. All right? And so, yes. So basically the idea is that the son wishes to replace the father. And as I said, I hinted at it in the last lecture, but it goes back to the story of Oedipus. Okay? If you ever have a chance, it would take you two and a half hours, maybe 3. Go back and read Oedipus the King. It's an amazing story. It's almost like the foundation of a lot of literature in Western society. I know that sounds like wildly general, but if you go back and read it, you realize, wow, there's a heck of a lot going on there. All right. So the idea, and also there was also the same similar pattern called the Electra complex, right? Where a young girl wishes to kill the mother and, become a partner, or I have to be careful with my language here, but to be with the father, right? Now, again, you got to remember, like, don't email me saying, well, that's disgusting, or that's what. No, I'm showing you it's a platform to create an argument, okay, to get into the story and basically argue what is going on here, right? It's not to say that is exactly what's going on, but as I said, it's a common theme throughout literature, very common. I'm sure one or two of you will email me saying, "Isn't that similar to something that you read in high school?" Right? And chances are I'll say, "Yes, that's exactly what's going on." So my point being, we now have two different possible essay topics. Okay, and gosh, we're already half an hour into it. It feels like I've only been talking for about 5 minutes. But so we have this notion on the one hand, you could talk about the notion of the house. Okay, make that the focus. But you could also talk about the notion of capitalism. You don't even have to bring the word capitalism into it, but the notion of luck and love, right? The relationship between the two, the confusion between the two. That would be another great possible essay topic as well. And so now I'm going to just jump a tiny bit, all right? I just want to look at my notes here. 413, right? Basically, we find out that he is, like, as he wins more and more money, he creates a secret, right? Remember, maybe I should give you the references on that. Yeah, I'm on 410 now, okay? And yeah, it's really interesting. If you're doing anything on the Oedipus complex, okay, I'm just going back for 1 second. If you're doing anything on the Oedipus complex, take a look on 410. He wanted luck. He wanted it. He wanted it. When the two girls were playing dolls in the nursery, he would sit on his rocking horse, charging madly into space with a frenzy that made the little girls peer at him uneasily. Like the sexual language is everywhere. Whenever he gets on that horse, it's almost like it's a sexual expedition, if you will, right? So again, if you're talking about the Oedipus complex, there's plenty in the story, all right? And I don't want to do too much more with that. Like, we've talked about that a bit already. But anyway, one day his mother and his uncle Oscar came in when he was on one of his furious rides. He did not speak to them. It's almost as if he's in a world of his own. So again, that could have to do with sexuality, right? The whole notion of being like a frenzied orgasm or what have you, but it could also go back to the notion of the occult, where he's being possessed, right? So that's the point I'm trying to make here. Don't try to do too much with the essay, right? Choose one aspect and work it through. But that's not to say that you can't choose the same idea, like the same words, and use them to your advantage. Okay, so there you go. Yeah. So basically now I'm going to jump a tiny bit because on 411 we just get the like we get a lot of information about the winning horses and everything else, right? And so I don't think I need to get into that too much. But then, all right, now here's another interesting essay topic. Well, on 412 we get the idea. I'm going to read it out to you. Okay. Okay. I've got a few things that I'm jumping over here. If you'd like to be a partner, Uncle, okay, with Bassett and me, we could all be partners, okay. Only you'd have to promise, okay, honor bright, meaning like Scout's honor, okay, honor bright, not to let go beyond the three, okay, beyond us three. So that was the second column in 412. Okay. So now here's another essay topic. Let's just say you're not interested in the psychology or the sexuality or anything like that. But in a course, you studied addiction. Boom. I'm going to lay it out for you right now. I'll give you an easy B to start with, right? A grade of B to start with, and then do whatever you can do with it. Paul is addicted. He's an addict. Okay? Suffers from an addiction. His addiction is gambling or whatever you want to explore. If you remember the outline that I showed you, okay, you start with the problem. Well, that's the problem, right? He's an addict. Why does the problem persist? Perfect. Enablers, right? If you've ever heard of that term, enablers, okay? People who enable him. Then you simply work it through to the conclusion of your essay. There it is right there, okay? Now the adults are going to become partners, okay, with Paul. Okay, see how we have an arc there? Remember last lecture I was talking about an arc? Well, there's a perfect arc right there. He's an addict, okay? And by the way, you would start maybe with what was the cause of his addiction? The lack of love from his mother. Then we get into the addiction itself, then we get into enabling, boom, and we're almost finished with the essay. See what I mean? So there's a lovely arc right there. Okay? So again, like I said, I'm not explaining the whole story to you, I'm just giving you ideas. So on page 412 then, yeah, that would work perfectly for an essay. No question about it. You start with the lack of love from the mother. That's what causes that, he needs to be fulfilled somehow, right? Though then the addiction is created. Okay. You could easily pull in Lacan at that point, depending upon how you want to do it, right? So you see what I'm trying to do here, right? Throwing around a whole lot of ideas. Okay. Now, there's one other thing that I thought that there's really two other things that I wanted to talk about. One that I'm not quite sure, no one really ever wants to talk about this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mention it very quickly, but I'm going to include it in the notes because one or two of you may find it interesting. Okay. On 414, okay, make sure we got want to make sure I've got the right sheets here. On 414, we find out that the mother actually gets a job secretly. I'm just throwing that back from 20 minutes ago. Like everything is secret in this story. Okay, so again, the whole notion of haunted, secrecy, all of that. But she gets a job, right? And it's in the bottom of the first column. I'll read the whole thing out to you. Bottom of the first column and then top of the second. All right. His mother went into town nearly every day. She had discovered that she had an odd knack of sketching furs and dress materials, so she worked secretly, okay, in the studio of a friend who was then the chief artist, whatever. All right. Okay. So again, this notion of secrecy, right? As I said, sorry, sneeze there. Sorry about that. We're far enough along now. Not worried about it. But anyway, so this notion then that she starts to work, she starts to earn money, but even that's not enough, right? So she starts to compare herself to another artist who makes more. This is an idea that basically Karl Marx talked quite a bit about. And I've given you his dates there, 1818 to 1883. But it's a fascinating idea called commodity fetishism. And so the word fetish, which again quite often is associated with sexuality, right? But the word itself actually simply means the adoration of an object or of the object. So it has to do with only wanting to attain the object for the sake of attaining the object. Not really having any kind of happiness from attaining it, but simply the need to attain it. So commodity, well, things. So wanting to attain things only for the sake of attaining things. He talked about that quite a bit, and I think that's another thing you could talk about in an essay, right? How basically, if you then connected that to the notion of Lacan, okay, again, that may be doing a bit too much, but I'm simply showing you two things here. That by showing that the mother will never be satisfied. Maybe I should just be very clear on that. She's never going to be satisfied, right? It doesn't matter how much money she makes, how much she acquires, she'll never be satisfied. So you could do that maybe I should say it this way. You could do that two different ways. You could either do it from Lacan's point of view, right? In other words, that lack will never be fulfilled. Okay? If you've read Lacan, you know what I mean. Or you could do it from a Marxist point of view. The whole notion of commodity fetish, right? That no matter how much she makes, That'll never be enough. Right? So again, it's all psychological, right? And so there's so many things we could talk about with that, but again, I don't want to bore you with it, all right? So let's get then near the end of the story, right? I'm just looking a bit of ahead here. I just want to check one thing out. Yeah, got about 2 or 3 more pages to go. As a matter of fact, I'm going to talk for another 5 minutes, and then maybe I'll take a break. We're 40 minutes in. I can't believe it went that quickly. So, all right. So if you remember, going back to the whole notion of commodity fetish and all of that, well, on 414, she gets the letter, okay, with £1,000, right? Well, not good enough, right? Now she wants the whole 5,000, right? So I think you get the whole idea. And at the same time, it's interesting, now the house starts to whisper that it needs even more. So, 2 ways of looking at that. Obviously, it's either Lacan and the notion of lack, right? Or again, it's commodity fetish. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how much she accumulates, it'll never be enough. So, the word I have then in my notes, okay, both Paul and the mother become alienated. And this is something that I don't want to take too much time on, but for those of you who are familiar with Marxist analysis, right? Again, you don't have to be. You don't have to be. But if you are, the whole notion that human beings will work all their lives, right, without that work really becoming part of who they are. And you get a job, you do what you got to do, right? But it doesn't really define you. It doesn't give you a sense of purpose. And that's kind of what's going on in this story as well. And so I'll read it very quickly, but basically, actually, no, I'll go off the notes, all right? This notion of alienation, it doesn't mean being alienated from you or me, like we had an argument, right? And now that's not at all what Marx is talking about. What Marx is talking about when it comes to alienation is that human beings feel, okay, many human beings, not all, feel as though they live in a world that they simply don't understand. Think about technology. It's the easiest way to think about it. If you surround yourself with technology, but you don't understand it, then you can become frustrated, right? If things don't work the way that you want them to. But wait. Who said you had to go out and buy that technology? Like, you made the choice to do that. So therefore, you're not alienated from the technology or the world. You're alienated from yourself. In other words, it's really interesting when you work it through. You created the world in which you live. So if you feel foreign, okay, well, who's to blame? So that's why, in a book by Peter Singer, who I know got into a lot of trouble with a lot of other anthropological things, but I love the way in which Singer summarizes this whole idea. Moreover, okay, the notion of history, the notion of history that Marx talks about, tells us that there's these forces, right, that seem like they are supernatural tyrants, okay? Like, in other words, above and beyond our power. But we created them. Human beings created, right, the structures that exist. Or we created the world, okay, that we occupy. And so, as to close off, human productive powers, instead of serving human beings, appear to them as alien and hostile forces, right? So that's what Marx means by alienation. Not alienated from the world, but alienated from yourself. You chose, okay, the world that you like the world that you occupy, that you have surrounded yourself in, right? Okay, let me give you a quick example. Most of us drive, right? We drive cars or trucks or SUVs or whatever. But if you ever broke down on the highway in the middle of the night, okay, in Algonquin Park, could you fix your car? Chances are, no, you couldn't. Okay. Did anyone force you to buy that car? No. Right? Okay. That's kind of what Marx is talking about. All right? All right? Yeah, I got to shave. This is driving me nuts. Anyway, So that's more or less what he's talking about, right? You chose to buy that vehicle and then drive it, but if it breaks down, can you fix it? Okay. Anyway, and so that's another interesting essay topic, I think, the notion of alienation in the. Oh, and by the way, okay, sorry, I've got a bit of a tickle. So if you're doing that topic, remember one thing, all right? Don't do more than one character. Okay, if you're talking about alienation in the story, talk about Paul or talk about the mother, okay, but not both. Again, I keep telling you this over and over again. That's not to say you can't bring other characters into your essay, but keep one as the main focus. Okay? I think I mentioned that. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that in the last lecture as well. And so, okay, so now we're 45 minutes in, and I think I've given you about 4 different essay topics now, 3 or 4. So, last couple of things, all right? So basically, what happens is if you're going to do the uh, the notion of alienation or capital, right? Anything along those lines, around 415, okay, what we begin to see is now Paul is actually working for his mother. That's a good way of looking at it, right? So, in a sense, those of you who maybe know a bit about Marx, well, he has become the proletariat. He's become the worker, right? And she has become the owner. Yet, isn't it interesting how, if you were to focus on her, then she is the worker in relation to, okay, the owner of the shop in which she works. This whole notion of working, right? All of that, those themes are everywhere in the story. And so there's, again, 1,000 different things you could do. So like I said, I don't have a central focus to the lecture, just throwing out ideas, hoping that maybe something will speak to you. And so he, so as I said, yeah, so he works for her, okay, but obviously it's never enough. I've got that bolded in the notes, right? And also, if you notice on 415, I wonder if I can find it here. Yeah, there's a mention in the story. See, one of the problems with my notes is I have almost everything highlighted, so it's hard to actually see what's important. But you might have noticed that now that there's more money in the household, there's a mention that now Paul will go to a school called Eton, Eton. It's right there. It's on 414, 415, it's somewhere in there. But anyway, and the point of that is that Eton is a very exclusive private school, very expensive. So this goes back to the very early part of the story. No matter how much money they have, they're always going to need more. They will find more trappings, right? More things to invest in, okay? Or well, I think you follow what I mean by that, all right? And so basically, this goes back then to Lawrence's whole notion of capitalism, right? His hatred of capitalism. And interestingly enough, it also goes back then to his relationship with his mother, right? Obviously, knowing that his mother despised his father, that would have had an impact on him as well. So as I said, you don't necessarily want to write on that as a topic, right? But it's there. Like, you can see it in the story. And so, eventually, Paul begins to lose his luck. Okay, so I'm giving you a tiny bit of plot summary now, not too much. Um, and then I'll end off with the whole notion of the pharmacon and all that, I guess. Yeah, students never really enjoy that. But anyway, um, let me just say something very quickly, all right? So if you think about it, in the story, another aspect you could work through, though I don't know if anyone's ever written on it, would be the whole notion of capitalism as pharmacon. So page 6, if you're looking for, if you don't understand what I'm saying, well, I've given you the notes. It's right there, okay, bolded. And the pharmacon simply goes back to Socrates. And so, as I said, I'm not going to get into the whole thing because I've given you all the notes that you need. But the idea, yeah, actually, it's not a bad way to almost end off the lecture because the pharmacon was both. It was a concept that many people didn't understand in Greek antiquity until Socrates, obviously through Plato, right? For those of you who know about that, um, Basically, the pharmacon was something that it was known as both the poison on the one hand and the cure on the other. So think about it. Go back to the uncanny, right? Uncanny. Remember? Same idea. It's more common than we realize. This notion of things that appear to be their opposites are actually the same. So think about it. Pharmacia, pharmacy, right? Well, when you go to the pharmacy, pharmacia, pharmacon, right? You go there to buy drugs. In other words, some drugs are very good for you and can keep you healthy. Then obviously there are other drugs that are very dangerous for you, right? Right? You see what I mean? So this notion of the pharmacon then, both the remedy and the cure. So we also see that in the story, right? That it seems as though that capital, right, money will be the cure for everything. There must be more money. There must be more money. But at the same time, it's actually the driving force that ends up killing Paul, right? Destruction. So there's another theory as well that you get into. Now, if you're going to rely on that, if you're going to write on that, don't rely on my notes. I'm just giving you the starting point, okay? If you're going to talk about the pharmacon, you should probably look that up, all right? Just so you're aware. And so ultimately then, okay, we find out that Paul also has a secret. Remember, I began with that at the beginning of the lecture, right? The whole notion of the secret, right? Secrets of the house and everything else. Well, ultimately, on 417, I believe it is, we find out that Paul has a secret as well. And his secret is the rocking horse. So, not quite sure what you want to do with that. I just thought, because the words are given to us, this notion that he has a secret too, it just goes back to the whole notion of secrecy, things being hidden or concealed, right? And then the importance of revealing. I just thought I'd throw that one at you, all right? Paul's secret of secrets was his wooden horse, that which had no name, all right? And so that's on 416 in the first column, about what, 3/4 of the way down. So the notion of secrecy once again. And so, right? Yeah. Basically, we realize by the time we get to 417, no matter how much is accumulated, no matter how much Paul wins in his horse dealings, it'll never be enough. So that goes back then, as I said, Lacan, commodity fetish, however you want to make the connections. We find out finally, okay, his very last insight or I don't know, demonic inspiration, if you will, right? It's Malabar. So that's his big win, right? Okay. And so he comes to the realization, but then of course he dies in the same evening, right? Same night. So a couple of last things. It's kind of interesting that if somehow you feel the need to bring the rocking horse itself into the story, well then it works perfectly, right? Paul rides and rides and rides, but it's a rocking horse. It doesn't go anywhere. So that would go back then to Lawrence's own notions of capitalism. You work hard, but you don't actually get any further. Please don't email me about this. It's a myth. For the most part, it's a myth. And that goes back to the 7-Up series that I was talking about. So maybe I should elaborate just a tiny bit on that. The director in the 7-Up series takes a look at these children, okay, from a wide variety, right? From orphanages to very, very rich families to whatever. Interviews them at 7, at 14. And of course, they all have their dreams and aspirations. And it's amazing that by the time they get to 35, they're all exactly where they should be in terms of class, right? The people from the orphanages have not made any gains. The people who were affluent to begin with are very affluent still. And there's lots of documentation on that. So please don't email me about that unless you've done a lot of study on that, because I have. All right. I might have mentioned to you in the first lecture, I came from the working class. It's so I'm aware of those things. All right. But anyway, so the rocking horse. Okay. He rides and rides and rides furiously, right? Furiously, possessively, right? There is the mention in the story of how he becomes almost possessed, demonized, right? But he doesn't get anywhere, except, okay, he dies. And so that's a comment on capitalism as well, no question about it. So there's another possible essay as well. All right. And so, yeah, you've got my notes there. And again, at the very end, if you want, if you're doing a Lacanian analysis, well then, the whole notion of desire, right? When do we finally, well, like, when is the end of desire? Well, sadly, it's in death. Like, we never stop desiring until we die. So that's why I thought I would include that as well. Okay, and it's really interesting too. Yeah, that all of his labor, right, basically brings him no closer to the love of his mother. So that's why at the very end, right? Yeah, it's interesting. He asks, "Do you think I'm lucky, mother?" Right? In other words, still searching for that lack, right? That never came to be fulfilled. And so I don't know if there's much else I need to talk about with that. I can't believe that took almost an hour. Like, that flew by. Literally, it flew by for me anyway. So it is interesting though. Maybe I'll close off with just the last lines though. Yeah. But poor devil, poor devil. He's best gone out of a life where he rides his rocking horse to find a winner. It's almost like Lawrence's own summary of capitalism itself, right? How we work and we work and we work, but we don't really ever get ahead. So anyway, didn't mean to end on such a sad note there, but as I said, I'm not saying all of that is true, but for the most part, what I'm saying is that's more or less where Lawrence is coming from. All right. Although a lot of what I did say is true. But anyway, all right. So yeah, let's call it a lecture on that. All right. And so like I said, if you didn't like Handsomest Drowned Man in the World, fine. Then maybe you'll find something in this one. And if you didn't find something in this one, well then, too bad. Find something in the Handsomest Drowned Man in the World. I'm joking. Anyway, all right. Have a great rest of the day. Okay. Bye.